It has already been shown that in his relativity, Einstein derives two different laws of motion under the action of a force of one single body in one single system. This is a drastic ignoring of the absolute truth that one body in one system can only obey one single law of motion under the action of a force. Recall this from another video. Therefore, it would have been enough for Einstein to apply just the first postulate to the first set of equations in part 10 of his 1905 paper to represent them in the moving system and vice versa. However, then, a purely trivial solution would have been the result, and there would have been no discovery at all, as is really the case. In his desire to make a discovery at any rate, Einstein redundantly uses Lorentz transformations for such representation, and as a result, ends up deriving two distinctly different expressions for the law of motion of one and the same body in one and the same system. It turns out that this collision with the absolute truths of his theory of relativity, in fact a collision which invalidates it, is not some accidental error in Einstein's reasoning, but is a fundamental problem of his thinking, recurring in other studies unrelated to his theory of relativity. Such singular ignoring of the absolute truth regarding the inherent uniqueness is flagrantly displayed once again in his unconnected to relativity paper regarding the derivation of Planck's black body radiation law. Einstein claims in his 1917 paper that he has derived Planck's radiation law. For this purpose, he uses the shown seemingly complicated, but in fact very simple balance equation. It expresses the obvious fact that at equilibrium, the number of molecules placed in a radiation field passing per unit time from a lower energy level to a higher energy level stimulated by that field is equal to the number of molecules per unit time passing from the higher energy level to a lower energy level, whereby noticeably the passing from higher to lower energy level occurs by two mechanisms. Stimulated by the radiation field and spontaneously. So far, the balance equation was written for the lower temperature, T sub 1. At high extreme temperatures, obviously the exponent becomes unity and the terms associated with the field, the first and the second term, become predominant, dwarfing the third term, which is signifying the spontaneous decay and is unassociated with the radiation field. Thus, neglecting the third term, the following equality describing the equilibrium at extreme temperature T sub 2 is obtained. At this point, Einstein undertakes a step which exemplifies a recurrent characteristic crucial flaw in his thinking. seen also in his unconnected theory of relativity. Einstein ignores the absolute truth that this equality is only valid for T sub 2 and incorrectly uses it to express one of its quantities through it. To apply it under conditions it isn't valid for, that is, at T sub 1. In this way, Einstein disregards the absolute truth that at a given temperature, say T sub 1, one single process can only be described by one single equilibrium, incorrectly imposing that at T sub 1, another equilibrium is valid simultaneously. The equality at T sub 2 is not an absolute equality, but is constrained by temperature T sub 2. Said equality is only valid at T sub 2 and cannot be used at T sub 1 as Einstein does. The argument that, P sub n is a constant and that is all that really matters, independent of the constraints, means that this quantity P sub n can be expressed in any other frivolous way, which will not lead to Planck's radiation formula at all. Consider also this. If the equation valid for T sub 2 were also valid at T sub 1, then the left sides of both equations, signifying the number of molecules per unit time transferred to a higher energy level, must be equal. But then we have But this result has nothing to do with Planck's radiation formula. Just as an exercise, you may look at the impossibility to use two different formulae in this way too. Namely, that in the formation of the constant P sub n at T sub 1, also parameter AMN participates, reflecting spontaneous decay. And not only P sub m, BMN and BNM, as is in the formation of the constant P sub n at T sub 2. It should be noted at the end that lack of conflict with absolute truths, obeying logic and reason, should be the first things to be checked before attempts to verify a scientific theory experimentally or otherwise. This should be a mandatory first step when applying the scientific method to assess the viability of a scientific theory. No experiment can prove that 1 equals 2, which is in effect what Einstein's relativity and his black body radiation law derivation claim. Therefore, no claim for such experiments should be heeded, and such experiments should never be considered and discussed at all.